Why are leaders who advocate for Africa's best interests always subjected to criticism from the West? Pierre Duro, advisor to Junta leader General Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema, and known for his staunch stand against corruption, now finds himself under scrutiny from Western powers. But for what? He faces accusations of corruption himself. But is this criticism legitimate or merely propaganda? Could it be that the West is envious of Gabon, an African nation gaining a positive reputation, and seeks to tarnish it by attacking Duro's credibility? Is there truth to these claims? Let's find out. In the world of Gabon's politics, few figures have garnered as much attention and controversy as Pierre Duro. As the principal advisor to Junta leader General Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema, Duro has been thrust into the spotlight for his role in auditing Gabon's domestic and foreign debt. This task, monumental in scope and significance, has drawn fire from various quarters, particularly in Libreville and Paris. But beneath the surface of these criticisms lies a deeper, more insidious narrative that raises crucial questions. Is Duro genuinely overstepping legal boundaries, or is he a target of a Western propaganda campaign aimed at undermining pro-African leaders? Before talking about that, let's understand who the man is under criticism. What he did to reach where he is, and he is credible. Pierre Duro's rapid ascent to power is an example of his expertise and commitment. With a robust background in finance and governance, Duro was appointed by General Nguema to lead a task force designed to bring transparency and accountability to Gabon's financial dealings. His mission is to meticulously audit the nation's debt, exposing irregularities and renegotiating unfavorable terms. For a country plagued by years of economic mismanagement, Duro's mandate was a beacon of hope. Pierre Duro's qualifications for the daunting task of auditing Gabon's debt are impeccable. Educated at some of the world's top universities, Duro holds advanced degrees in economics and public administration. His early career saw him working with international financial institutions where he gained significant experience in auditing, debt management, and financial restructuring. This background provided him with a deep understanding of both the technical and strategic aspects of financial oversight. Before he was appointed General Nguema's principal advisor, Duro had already made a name for himself as a reformer. He had successfully led several high-profile audits in other African countries, uncovering corruption and leading efforts to restructure debt in ways that were fair and beneficial to those nations. His reputation for integrity and effectiveness made him an ideal candidate for tackling Gabon's complex financial challenges. Upon his appointment, Duro immediately set to work on his primary objective, bringing transparency and accountability to Gabon's financial dealings. The nation's debt situation was dire, with years of mismanagement and corruption leaving the economy in a precarious state. Duro's task force was given unprecedented access to financial records, allowing them to conduct a thorough audit. One of Duro's first moves was to establish clear guidelines and processes for the audit. He insisted on complete transparency, requiring all government departments and agencies to cooperate fully and provide detailed accounts of their financial transactions. This approach not only ensured that the audit would be thorough, but also signaled a new era of openness in Gabon's government. As the audit progressed, Duro and his team uncovered numerous irregularities. They found evidence of widespread corruption, with funds being siphoned off into private accounts and contracts being awarded without proper oversight. These findings were not just about financial mismanagement. They revealed a deep-seated culture of corruption that had permeated Gabon's government for years. Duro's insistence on transparency meant that these findings were made public. This move was both risky and bold, as it exposed powerful individuals and institutions. However, Duro believed that only by shining a light on these practices could Gabon begin to move forward. His commitment to exposing the truth, regardless of the personal and political costs, underscored his dedication to his mission. In addition to uncovering corruption, Duro's task force was also charged with renegotiating the terms of Gabon's debt. Many of the country's loans had been taken out under unfavorable conditions, with high interest rates and punitive clauses that further strained the economy. Duro's expertise in financial restructuring was crucial in these negotiations. Working closely with international creditors, Duro sought to secure more favorable terms for Gabon. This often involved complex and delicate negotiations, as creditors were not always willing to adjust the terms of existing agreements. However, Duro's persistence and his deep understanding of financial markets allowed him to make significant progress. He successfully renegotiated several major loans, reducing interest rates and extending repayment periods, which provided much-needed relief to Gabon's economy. For many in Gabon, Duro's work represents a beacon of hope. After years of economic mismanagement and corruption, his commitment to transparency and accountability offers a path forward. His efforts to expose irregularities and renegotiate debt have not only improved the country's financial standing, but also restored some measure of trust in the government. However, Duro's work is far from over. The process of reforming Gabon's financial system is ongoing, and there are still many challenges to be addressed. Corruption, while diminished, has not been eradicated, and the economy remains fragile. Nonetheless, Duro's impact is undeniable. His expertise and dedication have set Gabon on a path toward greater financial stability and integrity. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Despite his achievements, Duro's work has not been without controversy. Powerful individuals and institutions that benefited from the old system have resisted his efforts, and his insistence on transparency has made him many enemies. Some have accused him of overstepping his authority and using the audit as a political tool. Critics, mostly international, have accused Pierre Duro of employing methods that border on illegality in his role as the leader of Gabon's debt audit. Companies in Libreville claim that their task force has adopted an excessively aggressive approach, while in Paris, creditors express unease over the potential disruption of long-standing financial agreements. However, one must question the motives behind these accusations. Are they grounded in legitimate concerns about procedural fairness, or do they represent a broader attempt to discredit a leader who dares to challenge the status quo? In Libreville, many local businesses and officials have voiced concerns about Duro's methods. They argue that his task force's aggressive tactics, such as unannounced audits and stringent demands for financial records, have created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Companies claim that these methods have not only disrupted their operations, but have also damaged their reputations by implying guilt before any wrongdoing is proven. Some local critics suggest that Duro's approach lacks the necessary legal safeguards to ensure fairness. They argue that the task force's sweeping powers to investigate and sanction companies may lead to abuses of authority. These critics contend that a more measured and legally robust process would achieve the same goals of transparency and accountability without collateral damage to businesses and the economy. In Paris, where many of Gabon's creditors are based, there is significant unease about Duro's audit. International banks and financial institutions worry that the audit's findings could lead to a restructuring of debts that would harm their interests. These institutions have long-standing financial agreements with Gabon, and any disruption to these agreements poses a risk to their financial stability. Critics in Paris argue that Duro's audit is destabilizing and could damage Gabon's relationships with international creditors. They claim that the aggressive renegotiation of debt terms, while beneficial for Gabon in the short term, could lead to a loss of investor confidence in the long run. This, they argue, would make it more difficult for Gabon to secure favorable terms for future loans and investments. While these criticisms from Libreville and Paris raise valid concerns, it is essential to examine the underlying motives behind them. Are these criticisms genuinely about the fairness and legality of Duro's methods, or do they reflect a deeper resistance to change? In Libreville, the opposition to Duro's methods may partly stem from those who have benefited from the status quo. Corruption and financial mismanagement have long been entrenched in Gabon's political and economic systems. Duro's commitment to transparency and accountability threatens the interests of those who have profited from these corrupt practices. Thus, the aggressive tactics of his task force might be necessary to break through the deeply rooted culture of corruption. Similarly, in Paris, the unease among creditors could be driven by a desire to protect their financial interests. International banks and financial institutions have a vested interest in maintaining favorable debt terms with Gabon. Duro's efforts to renegotiate these terms threaten their profits and influence. Their criticisms of his methods may be less about procedural fairness and more about preserving their financial stake in Gabon. But Duro's actions must be understood within the broader context of a global movement toward greater financial sovereignty for African nations. For decades, many African countries have been saddled with debt agreements that favor foreign creditors and hinder economic development. Leaders like Duro are challenging this dynamic by insisting on fairer terms and greater transparency. The backlash against Duro can be seen as part of a larger resistance to this movement. By portraying his methods as overreaching and illegal, critics aim to undermine his credibility and maintain the existing power structures. This narrative of overreach serves to distract from the substantive issues at hand: the need for greater transparency, accountability, and fairness in financial dealings. Despite the controversy, Duro's methods have had a significant impact on Gabon's financial landscape. The audit has already uncovered extensive corruption and mismanagement, leading to the prosecution of several high-profile individuals. These actions have sent a clear message that corruption will no longer be tolerated and have begun to restore public trust in the government. Moreover, Duro's renegotiation of debt terms has provided much-needed relief to Gabon's economy. By securing lower interest rates and longer repayment periods, he has alleviated some of the financial pressures facing the country. These achievements demonstrate the effectiveness of his approach, despite the criticisms. Now let's talk about the local reaction. In Gabon's capital, the response to Duro's audit is polarized. On one hand, his efforts are seen as a much-needed intervention to combat corruption and financial opacity. Many Gabonese support the audit, viewing it as a critical step toward economic stability and national integrity. On the other hand, businesses with vested interests in maintaining the current system fear the repercussions of such sweeping changes. Their resistance, however, may be less about legal overreach and more about protecting entrenched interests. But the question is this a genuine concern or propaganda? In Paris, the epicenter of many of Gabon's foreign creditors, the narrative surrounding Pierre Duro's audit is one of skepticism and caution. French companies, with deep financial ties to Gabon, have voiced concerns about Duro's methods and the potential consequences of his audit. These concerns range from fears about the legality of his approach to worries about the stability of long-standing financial agreements. However, it is essential to scrutinize the underlying motivations of these criticisms. France, a Western power with historical ties to Gabon, stands to lose significant influence if Duro's pro-Africa stance succeeds. Could the backlash from Paris be less about the legality of Duro's methods and more about preserving Western economic dominance? France's relationship with Gabon dates back to the colonial era, and these historical ties have translated into substantial economic interests. French companies have invested heavily in Gabon's infrastructure, oil industry, and various other sectors. As a result, France has a vested interest in maintaining a stable and favorable environment in Gabon. Any disruption to this environment, such as the one posed by Duro's aggressive audit, threatens these economic interests. French banks and financial institutions are particularly concerned about the audit's potential to lead to a restructuring of Gabon's debt. Such restructuring could result in less favorable terms for creditors, impacting their profits and financial stability. These institutions argue that Duro's methods, which they perceive as aggressive and unilateral, could undermine the trust and cooperation necessary for international financial agreements. While these concerns are presented as being about the legality and fairness of Duro's methods, it is crucial to consider whether there is more at play. The strong reaction from Paris could also be seen as a form of propaganda to preserve France's economic dominance in Gabon. By framing Duro's actions as overreaching and destabilizing, critics in Paris might be attempting to delegitimize his efforts and maintain the status quo that favors Western interests. This narrative of concern can serve to protect the existing power structures that have long benefited French companies and financial institutions. By casting doubt on the legitimacy of Duro's audit, these critics can rally support for their cause and potentially influence public opinion and policy decisions both in Gabon and internationally. The broader geopolitical context cannot be ignored. Duro's pro-Africa stance is part of a larger movement among African nations to assert greater control over their economic destinies. This movement challenges the traditional power dynamics that have often placed Western interests above those of African countries. For France, a successful audit by Duro that led to significant financial reforms in Gabon could set a precedent that other African nations might follow. This shift in power dynamics is unsettling for Western powers that have historically exerted considerable influence over African economies. The resistance from Paris can therefore be seen as part of a broader effort to maintain Western hegemony in the region. By undermining Duro's credibility, critics hope to stall or reverse the momentum towards greater African financial sovereignty. The media plays a significant role in shaping public opinion on Duro's actions. In France, the portrayal of Duro's audit has often been negative, emphasizing the potential risks and instability it could bring. This media narrative influences how the public perceives Duro and his efforts, potentially swaying opinions against him. It is important to question the objectivity of these media reports. Are they reflecting genuine concerns, or are they part of a concerted effort to protect French economic interests? The way Duro is depicted in the media can significantly impact the international community's support for his efforts, and by extension, the success of his audit. Despite the criticisms and challenges, Duro remains steadfast in his mission. His commitment to transparency and accountability is unwavering, and his efforts have already begun to yield results. By exposing corruption and renegotiating debt terms, he is laying the groundwork for a more stable and equitable financial future for Gabon. For Gabon, the outcome of this audit is crucial. If successful, it could pave the way for greater financial independence and development. It would also signal to other African nations that challenging the status quo and asserting their economic sovereignty is possible. Now the question is, what is the balanced approach of viewing this? Pierre Duro's actions must be viewed within the larger context of a burgeoning pro-Africa movement gaining momentum across the continent. As the principal advisor to General Nguema, Duro symbolizes a shift towards African self-determination, challenging the long-standing financial and political hegemony of Western nations. This transformation threatens the traditional power dynamics, prompting a backlash framed under the guise of concerns over legality and fairness. The emergence of leaders like Duro and Nguema signifies a broader movement among African nations to assert greater control over their economic destinies. Historically, African countries have been subject to economic structures that prioritize Western interests, often at the expense of local development and sovereignty. Duro's mandate to audit Gabon's debt and reform its financial practices is a direct challenge to these entrenched dynamics, aiming to ensure that Gabon's resources serve its people first and foremost. The Western media's portrayal of Duro as a rogue operative could be seen as a calculated effort to discredit his work and maintain Western economic interests in Africa. By painting Duro's actions as overreaching or destabilizing, critics might be attempting to undermine a significant move toward African empowerment and financial independence. The portrayal of Duro's audit as disruptive or illegitimate serves to reinforce the narrative that Western oversight is necessary for stability and economic progress in Africa. Duro's role in Gabon exemplifies a growing sentiment among African leaders that true development requires reclaiming control over financial resources and decision-making processes. His efforts to promote transparency and accountability in Gabon's financial sector are not just about auditing debts or renegotiating terms. They are about reshaping power dynamics that have long favored interests over local needs. Moreover, Duro's actions resonate beyond Gabon's borders, inspiring similar movements across Africa, where leaders are increasingly advocating for economic policies that prioritize national interests. The backlash against Duro from Western critics underscores the tension between maintaining established economic structures and embracing a more equitable and self-determined future for African nations. The narrative surrounding Duro's audit reflects a broader struggle over perceptions of African agency and capability. Western powers and their media outlets often portray African-led initiatives as risky or unreliable, reinforcing stereotypes of incompetence or corruption. This portrayal serves to perpetuate the notion that African nations require external oversight and guidance to achieve economic stability and development. However, proponents of African sovereignty argue that such narratives overlook the resilience and potential within African economies and leadership. They contend that initiatives like Duro's audit are essential steps towards reclaiming economic independence and ensuring that African resources benefit African people. Pierre Duro's audit in Gabon represents more than a financial exercise. it is a pivotal moment in the broader struggle for African self-determination and empowerment. His actions challenge entrenched power dynamics that have long favored Western interests, sparking debate and resistance both within Gabon and internationally. While criticisms of Duro's methods may raise valid concerns about procedural fairness and economic stability, it is crucial to scrutinize these critiques within the context of broader geopolitical interests. The portrayal of Duro as a threat to stability or legitimacy reflects a deep-seated reluctance to cede control over African economic affairs. Ultimately, the outcome of Duro's audit will have implications far beyond Gabon's borders, influencing perceptions of African agencies and the future of international economic relations. Whether viewed as a disruptive force or a catalyst for positive change, Duro's actions highlight the complex interplay between African sovereignty and Western influence in the 21st century global economy. Do you think the West is jealous of Gabon having good officials? Is this the reason why the best leaders are under criticism? Let us know in the comment section. When will the West end its propaganda against Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.